What most of us do know, I think, is that the perception of a lack of fairness or equity in any system breeds contempt, anger, and really, in this situation, corruption, using the business of a people smuggler. It opens the pathway. When people can't see a fair system they can engage in that delivers results, then they'll find any other way to get the results that they want. And that's why people are coming on a boat using a people smuggler, because they have no faith in the system of UNHCR being able to process their claims and being able to be settled in another country. So the challenge in creating a fair asylum solution in our region really has to lie with multiple countries. And that is going to be incredibly challenging because we have an economically diverse region. When you look at the countries engaged in our region, some who've signed the convention, some who haven't. And it may end up being to try and create a model that is fair across an economically diverse region has to look different to other models such as that's been created in the European system. And it may be the case that some standards do differ across the region when we look at a bigger model of how we can safely and appropriately process asylum seekers and settle them. There is no question that the living conditions in Indonesia or Malaysia, if we're able to succeed in a more robust processing context, is not going to be the same as someone living on a bridging visa in Australia. But what we do know would be essential to any model that would be built in our region is that standards of care and processing need to be strong and need to be consistent. And the International Convention and other conventions give us a guide to that. We're not in a situation of lack of information around appropriate standards and care in terms of the way people can be processed. And with the support of the UNHCR and other international bodies, it's quite possible to implement those standards of a fair process and basic living conditions. Of course, countries involved in any model like that into the future would have to agree to those standards. What I think, though, is important when we're talking about a future model is not just the standards of care and processing. It fundamentally lies with the issue of safety. And the people who, by nature of seeking asylum, are seeking safety. Some of the politicians are saying, when we offer protection to asylum seekers, we're not promising them a first-class system. Well, and therefore implying that they are not, should not expect the conditions of living permanently in Australia. And to some degree, that is true. People who are seeking asylum or refugees settle in a range of countries across the world. And I think there is one significant question that we need to have a look at when we look at the changes of the numbers that are arriving in Australia. And that is that we, on one side, we can either decide that we want to be a country that processes everybody who arrives. We've signed the convention, we have domestic legislation that reflects the convention. So if someone arrives seeking asylum, we're obliged to process them. It's not like countries who currently have a large influx of people coming out of the Syrian context, or even Pakistan, with people coming out of Afghanistan. Whilst they have much larger numbers they host, they're not obliged to process the people who are seeking asylum because they haven't signed the convention. And so in those situations, people generally will be hosted for a short time, is often what they hope. What we know is that that's often a protracted period of time, in order that they can return to their home country. Now, that's not the context for Australia. Anyone who arrives here who seeks asylum, as I said, we're obliged to process them, and then we're obliged to give them some form of protection. It doesn't have to be permanent. The convention's fairly clear that temporary protection actually is allowed. and in circumstances can be used.